All right, let's settle in. All right, everyone, let's settle in. We're deep into the territory now. We've been talking about the mechanics of command, but we're moving into something much more unstable.
Unstable is an understatement, Seth. I feel like I can practically feel the static in the air just looking at these pages.
That's just the energy from my dinner, Em. But seriously, I'm dialing in from my home studio today. And even through the mic, I'm feeling the weight of this. We're looking at Koetting's account of, well, a spontaneous manifestation.
Let's call it what it is, a hallucination or a miracle, depending on how much you like drama.
Let's look at the text. He's describing the scene. He's by the water. He says the incense smoke is rising, but then he describes something else. Steam rising from the water hitting eye level. And instead of these thick, heavy shapes, he sees this special white light piercing every particle of the mist.
That sounds beautiful. Almost like a transition into a different frequency.
It gets more intense. He says, from the center of every particle of mist, the countenances of the angels I was calling emerged.
Here we go. The I saw angels in the steam trope.
Wait, Jane, look at how he frames it. He says he formulated a prayer based on this specific reality. He's calling out, El Shaddai, send down the angels to assist me in this sacred rite. Send me angels! Send me angels!
El Shaddai. I was reading earlier, and that name is heavy. It's linked to the Mahdi ones. In some traditions, it's a plural concept or group of powerful beings.
It's interesting because he says this happened during an automatic evocation. He says his body began to sway. His mind didn't even want to stay conscious. It longed to fall into the darkness of oblivion.
He's describing a total loss of ego. He's fighting to stay excited, fighting to stay focused on the materialization. And then get this. He says the angels appeared about 2 to 3 feet above the water.
And he claims they were held up by rapid streams of wind, even though the air around him was absolutely still.
Okay, now that's a classic glitch in the Matrix moment.
Exactly, and he says they were fully materialized, visible to anyone, and the first thing they did, they spoke. A multitude of voices sounding like a song, but the words were perfectly clear. They were asking, how can we be of service?
Wait, stop right there. This is the part that always gets me. He says most people see this and dismiss it as a hallucination or treat it as a one-time religious revelation. But he claims he sees it as a turning point in the history of all existence.
Talk about an ego trip.
But look at his logic. He says this experience actually pushed him away from religion. He says instead of making him a religious fanatic, it made him follow his own unique path of experience, rather than blind faith and dead hope.
I mean, I get that. You can't worship a statue if you've actually felt the breath of the thing you're calling.
Right. But then he moves into the architect part of our theme. He says the path of ascension is personal. It doesn't belong to any religion or savior. It can be paved with ivory or burning sulfur. It depends on what the individual needs.
He's saying the method doesn't matter as much as the result.
Precisely. He claims the only things that break the ritual, the only things that shatter the power of the evoker, are doubt and fear. He says if you can eliminate those, you can achieve absolute certainty that there is only one possible result.
He's basically saying, if you believe hard enough, the universe has to obey. That sounds dangerously close to the subjective synthesis claim we talked about earlier.
It is. He's saying that through this, you move from unheard voices to loud thunder. He says you can literally take these results and put them in your pocket.
I'd settle for putting a little extra cash in my pocket, honestly.
But then he gets even more radical. He says this type of invocation, what the believers call prayer, can be used with anyone. He says he used the name El Shaddai first, but he's had the same results calling on Vishnu, Baphomet, Set, or Algal.
So it's not about the specific name, it's about the resonance?
Exactly. The only difference is which entities appear. He's adamant that these aren't just reflections of a fragmented mind, but real, intelligent individuals.
He's doubling down on the claim that they are real, existing individuals. It's a massive leap from the psychological approach.
He even gives practical advice here. He says you need the smoke of incense to fill the temple, and candles that match the nature of the deity. But then, and this is the kicker, he says the most effective invocation is spontaneous and unpracticed.
Like a jam session. You don't plan the notes, you just let the rhythm take you.
Exactly. He says the greatest lesson he learned was the ability to humble the ego and become a vessel for divine inspiration. He says if you can turn off your rational mind because it's too weak and prone to error, and instead rely on an external and perfect source, then your words and actions become perfect.
That sounds so heavy. To just let go of your own intellect entirely.
It sounds like a recipe for losing yourself in a way you can't come back from.
And that's exactly where he leaves us. He says the ritual must be spontaneous, as if the evoker himself was summoned by the deity. He's moving away from the rigid manual style of the old grimoires and into something much more wild. So, we've reached the point where the training wheels come off. Koetting is basically saying that once you've mastered the internal mechanics, the external tools, they become secondary. He says the moment when his desire, like an undeveloped thought form, could soar into the stratosphere to create change, became so familiar he could recreate it instantly.
That sounds like a massive shift in agency. It's moving from I'm following a recipe to I am the chef.
Or I'm just hallucinating because I've memorized the steps so well, I don't notice the gaps.
But listen to his justification. He says because of the results he's had, he realized he could actually abandon the tools he used to follow so diligently. He's saying the spirits don't care if your circle is perfectly drawn or if your wand is painted strictly red and yellow.
I mean, if I'm a demon, I'm not checking the feng shui of your ritual space. I'm looking for the vibe.
Exactly. He says the tools are just for creating ritual dynamics. They are, and I quote, crutches. He says the real skill is recognizing the moment of metaphysical activation.
He uses this really beautiful metaphor here. He says you need to recognize that moment with the same childlike excitement you'd feel running into a room on Christmas morning to see the tree and the presents.
Great. So we're just using Christmas morning as a psychological anchor for summoning entities.
But look at where he takes the mechanics. He talks about the wand or the dagger, the projections of your will. He describes the energy rising in your chest, traveling down your arm, through the blade, and into an object. And then he asks a question that hits our whole architect theme. Why can't you just direct your energy where it needs to go, through your fingers, instead of using a dagger?
Wait, so he's saying the dagger is just a pointer? Like a laser pointer?
Precisely. He says in the spiritual spheres, every point touches every other point. There is no intermediate space. So, if the energy is already there, the physical distance doesn't even matter. The tool is just a suggestion to your own mind.
That is so much more streamlined. It's less about the stuff and more about the flow.
It sounds like he's just describing a very intense form of visualization. The object is there, where you are. It's a classic way to bypass the physical.
But he's talking about more than the dagger. He even talks about the chalice. He says the whole point of the cup is to hold the elixir of life, to replenish the operator. But then, and this is wild, he says, you can reproduce that effect without the wine or the cup. You can just drink the blood of God in its pure form, by absorbing divine omnipotence into your soul.
Whoa. Okay, that went from use your fingers instead of a knife to become a literal vessel for the divine. Pretty fast.
It's a total dissolution of the container, the cup, the wand, the circle. They all just melt away into pure intention.
And yet, he still tells you to keep the altar. He says the altar is practical. He's being very careful not to lose his audience entirely.
Right. But he uses the altar to pivot to a huge critique of the old way. He addresses the triangle of manifestation. He acknowledges the tradition that the triangle is a sort of astral prison to trap the spirit, using the names of the tetragrammaton as a triple protection, because spirits are inherently harmful.
That's the classic Solomonic setup. I've got you trapped in this geometric cage, so behave.
Exactly, but he calls that an archaic belief that has been refuted by thousands of evocators. He claims the power we work with transcends all religious canons. You don't need the names of the Jewish God, or the Messiah, or the Holy Spirit.
He's stripping the ritual of its cultural armor. He's saying the magic works regardless of the label.
Which, if you think about it, makes the ritual much more dangerous. If there's no holy barrier, you're just standing in an open field with whatever shows up.
And he describes what happens when you drop that barrier. He says that as you advance, the triangle isn't even a place anymore. The entire temple, the whole room becomes the site of manifestation. The spirit can appear anywhere, in any form, at its own whim.
That sounds like a recipe for a very messy house.
He says the spirit becomes more spontaneous, more lively. It can even bring its familiars with it. He's describing a state where the distinction between the ritual space and the spiritual world just evaporates.
It's like the boundary between the singer and the song disappears.
That's exactly it. The architect isn't building a cage anymore. He's just opening a door. Okay, we need to slow down. We've gone from tools are just crutched to something much more visceral. We're moving into the actual mechanics of breaking the circle.
And here comes the part where everyone loses their minds.
It's a metaphor, Jane. He's talking about the fundamental rule of any powerful ritual. You must have a circle drawn on the ground. And as long as that spirit isn't released or expelled, you do not, under any circumstances, cross that boundary.
Because the circle is the only thing standing between the magician and the lading abyss.
Exactly. He says the circle is the barrier between the physical world and the abyss, and between the human and their own limitless nature.
I love how he frames it. The circle is eternity, but it's a closed figure. To get to the real infinite, you have to move toward a single point, or, even better, nothing at all.
So, the goal is to eventually become nothing? That sounds less like magic and more like a bad Tuesday.
But look at the warning, Jane. He cites the diaries of almost every occultist who ever lived. He says you can find testimonies of madness or death for those who broke the circle during evocation.
That's heavy. Like actual physical or mental destruction?
But, and here's the pivot, he says there's a whole class of unpublished records. People who broke the boundaries of prudence and safety, not by accident, but on purpose. He says he went looking for them. He sat with them, and he found that their results were different.
He quotes one of them. Listen to this. We haven't just reached a new level. We are already playing a completely different game.
That is the most. I've discovered a secret line I have ever heard.
But he admits it's dangerous. He says starting without a circle is stupid and leads to death. He says evocation triggers processes in the human psyche that are, well, he says the power is so great, the flesh and mind can barely endure it. He says you have to enter the black waters of the abyss slowly until you feel like you can no longer breathe.
That sounds like the edge of a trance. Like that moment in yoga where the breath just stops being yours.
He actually gives a specific technique here. He says use the circle and the triangle as described before. But once the spirit has fully materialized, you erase the line of the circle that touches the triangle. You erase it from sight.
Wait, so you're intentionally weakening the defense?
Yes. He says as you erase it, you feel the magical protection dissipating. You are now completely defenseless against any malevolent influence the spirit might want to exert.
This is insane. If I'm standing there and the line is gone and I'm defenseless, why would I stay?
Because, and this is the core claim, he says if you aren't some self-righteous practitioner trying to use the name of a god to enslave a demon, the demon won't react. It won't break its chains or strike you with lightning. It will just wait for your greeting.
So the protection doesn't come from the chalk on the ground?
No. He says the protection comes from within, from the divine nature of the magician.
Okay, but he still links the danger to the psyche. He says the greatest danger isn't physical harm, but obsessive attachment to the spirit.
Right. He says the spirit enters your sphere of enough influence through a communication so subtle you might not even realize it's happening. And the danger comes from the evoker's own state. If you cross the line with trembling hands and a heart thumping in panic, the spirit will simply manifest your fears.
So if you think the abyss is going to eat you, it's going to eat you.
Exactly. But if you cross that line with absolute certainty that you are stepping into a new level of evolution, then that is your first step into infinity.
He's describing a psychological feedback loop. The ritual is a mirror.
Precisely. And then he outlines this 3-step process. First, you do the evocation with the circle and triangle. Second, you go back into the temple with only a circle, no triangle. You step out of the circle and meet the spirit in the open space of the temple.
And he says the first time you do this, you're likely to pass out.
Because the spiritual exhaustion is so intense, the mind starts lying to you. It tries to tell you that reality is inside the circle and subjective reality is in the triangle. It tries to reject the experience because it was programmed by society to do so.
My brain does that every time I try to meditate. This isn't happening. You're just sitting in a chair.
He says the masters often remain silent for long periods because the experience is too profound to put into words. He compares it to murder or intercourse.
Jesus!
He says it requires repetition to be integrated. The first time is an initiation into divinity, a violation of the rules that kept you safe but also kept you bound. The second time is the confirmation of your sovereignty. And by the third time, the drug of power starts to become addictive.
That is a heavy cost. The drug of power.
He even names the types of people this happens to: murderers, lovers, and ritual magicians.
I think I'm definitely in the ritual magician category, though I'm leaning heavily toward lover of Munchkin.
But then, the final step. An architect move, he says, perform the evocation with no circle and no triangle, from beginning to end.
Now we're just asking to be eaten by a demon.
He says you go to a remote place, describes driving into the American Southwest, away from the city lights. You draw a sigil on the ground, light a small fire, and use sage or oregano for incense. You meditate, you connect your energy to the spirit's energy, and you just wait.
No boundaries. No protection, just the self and the entity.
It's the total dissolution of the ritual structure. It's the end of the manual and the beginning of the pure, unmediated encounter.
I need a minute to recover from that imagery.
Agreed. Let's take a quick breather and grab some water.